At History Grunt, we look at history from the viewpoint of the vanquished, the losers, the conquered and the victims, not from the side of the winners who get to dictate the story and take home the spoils. We spare a thought for the defeated whose stories are forgotten. History remembers the victors. We remember the cost. Today, we look at the massacre of the Gallic tribes perpetrated in the dying days of the Roman Republic, a forgotten war that shaped Europe for over 2,000 years. Some see Julius Caesar as a hero and a great general, the ultimate role model of all that a powerful leader should be. Daring and decisive, an achiever of great things, a man cut down in his prime by traitors. But at History Grunt we consider him a genocidal monster, a psychopath and a mass murderer who, unprovoked, invaded a country and wiped out or enslaved 50% of its people. The Gallic Wars took place between 58 BCE and 50 BCE. They were nothing less than a brutal massacre of the Gallic tribes, and it was not fought for the sake of Rome. It was fought because one man was broke, politically exposed, and running out of time, and an entire country was turned into the final solution to this man's personal problems. In the middle of the 1st century BCE, Rome was not facing invasion from the north. Gaul was not a nation. It was just a mosaic of competing tribes, all suspicious of one another, often trading with Rome, sometimes fighting between themselves, and rarely united. There was no coordinated Gallic plan to cross the Alps, no looming catastrophe waiting to happen. The real threat to Rome was domestic instability. Its politics had become a bear fight conducted through elections when reputation mattered more than legality. Debt destroyed careers, and the one reliable path to lasting power was military success abroad, which invariably brought both riches and reputation in an increasingly technologically sophisticated society where the old virtues had run out of road. Failure, on the other hand, meant prosecution, whereas success brought immunity. Julius Caesar only attacked Gaul because he was financially ruined and seized on the slightest pretext to cross into Gallic territory with his legions. Gaul for him was an opportunity, and its humanity was irrelevant to his lust for money, power and influence. Years of bribery, subsidizing public games, and political advancement had left him effectively broke. Without an active command, he faced debt, disgrace and prosecution the moment he returned to civilian life. His enemies, who saw right through his overarching ambitions, were waiting patiently for that outcome. War was the escape. It promised loot, slaves, loyal legions, and most importantly, political immunity. Early military success within the remit of his command as general created momentum. But once victories accumulated, he had to up the ante. Legality became an inconvenience. He had to wage war on someone, and the Gauls were there. The problem for him was that no such war had been lawfully authorized by the Senate in Rome. Caesar's incursion into Gaul clearly crossed the limits of his proconsular authority. There was no clean mandate for a prolonged war of conquest. So threats were exaggerated and justifications improvised until escalation into an invasion could be manufactured. Hanging over all of this was an older fear. Centuries earlier, Gallic warriors had sacked Rome itself. The city had survived, but the memory never left the Roman psyche, and Gaul became Rome's inherited trauma, the lands north of Italy imagined not as geography, but as a menace. The people needed reassurance that Gallic tribes were not coming over the mountains at any moment. Caesar understood this perfectly. His writings did not simply describe events, they shaped perception. Caesar's Gallic wars, Commentari de Bello Gallico, functioned as the social media of its age. Constant, repetitive, emotionally charged, and authored by the man who most benefited from his audience, swallowing every overblown tale he sent back to Rome. Each campaign was framed as preemptive, each enemy as volatile and not to be trusted, each escalation as an unavoidable reaction to an unwarranted provocation. Complexity vanished in the grab for glory and lust for power. By the time Rome encountered facts, its people had already absorbed the story. The brutal violence did not need the consensus of politicians. It only needed repetition to be justified. The Gauls were not Romans, which meant they were barbarians, devoid of humanity. They had it coming to them. That was the story that Julius Caesar told, but it was all propaganda. Before the legions arrived, Gaul was not empty, primitive, or chaotic. It was organized, productive, and culturally confident. Its people lived in large fortified towns, traded across Europe, minted coinage, and produced metalwork so refined that Roman elites collected it while publicly sneering at its makers. Power was negotiated rather than imposed. Law was remembered as folklore, not written in codices. Art valued symbolism over monuments. It was not a military society, and this was its weakness. None of this fitted Rome's definition of civilization, and so Rome denied Gaul had one. What followed was not the birth of civilization in Gaul, but its subjugation and continued existence under Roman terms, after its towns had been burned, its warriors killed or mutilated, and women and children sold into slavery. Once Caesar went into Gaul, victory was inevitable. Caesar was at the helm of the most efficient killing machine known to man to that date. Gauls fought as individual tribal warriors with local affiliation. Rome fought as a machine consisting of professional legions, standardized weapons, engineered siege machines, and sophisticated logistics and supply lines. Courage could not compensate for a system designed not just to win battles, but to stamp out resistance. The end game was not just victory, but total dominance, territorial, economic, and psychological. The ensuing war was an unrelenting campaign of brutality. Caesar marched his legions across Gaul year after year, his legions burning villages and destroying crops and seizing food supplies. Terror and starvation was used to make future resistance psychologically impossible. His legions were an extermination machine. In some cases, destruction was not enough. When towns rebelled more than once, Caesar chose to horribly mutilate the defeated rather than simply murder them all, sending them back alive to what remained of their traumatized communities, unable to work or feed themselves. The message was clear: surrender, or this will happen to you. A subjugated population could still farm. It could still pay tribute. And it could still warn others what resistance to Rome now meant. Violence had become a means of communication. Terror had become military policy. Entire tribes vanished as political entities. Survivors were sold into slavery on such a scale that markets were flooded. None of this was hidden to the people back in Rome, and none of it was accidental. And we know this because Caesar recorded it himself. In his Commentari de Bello Gallico, the tone is calm, bureaucratic, almost hygienic. Enemy dead are counted. Roman losses are minimized. It's a story the people want to hear, and it is propaganda of extraordinary effectiveness. By 52 BCE, Gaul did the only rational thing left. It united. Vercingetorix, the de facto king of the Gauls, although he was really just the preeminent tribal leader, managed briefly to coordinate resistance across tribal lines. But it came too late, and Vercingetorix had already made a fatal mistake. Just when he had Caesar finally boxed in and running low on supplies, he withdrew to the hillside town of Alesia to wait for the united tribes to arrive. And there Caesar sealed the outcome. He encircled the city with fortifications, then built a second line facing outward, preparing not just to trap those inside, but to annihilate any attempt at rescue by the incoming Gallic army. Inside the walls, it was starvation. Outside, slaughter. When food ran out, the women and children were expelled and left to die between the Roman and Gallic lines. The Gauls did not allow them back in, and Caesar left them to die exposed in no man's land. This was not necessity. It was demonstration. And when Vercingetorix finally surrendered and Alesia fell, resistance ended in Gaul. The war lasted nearly a decade. Even conservative estimates suggest hundreds of thousands killed and millions enslaved. Whole regions were traumatized into compliance. Gaul was pacified not through integration, but through memory. Caesar returned to Rome transformed, debts erased, and political capital at all-time high. His soldiers were devoted and loyal, and enemies were silent. The illegality of the war was no longer discussed because it had been so spectacularly successful, and all of his political opponents had fled Rome for their country estates to wait and see what was coming next. Rome absorbed the lesson without comment. It was not the type of society that punished ambition, and it rewarded military success. It also revered wealth. Within a few years, the republic that claimed to despise kings would submit to Caesar. The Senate became subservient to one man. Caesar likely caused the deaths of 500,000 Gauls. Another million were sold into slavery. We are talking about 25% of the population of the time. This was the most violent war in the history of the European continent, and there has been no shortage of those. But strip away the marble and rhetoric of Caesar's conquest of Gaul, and something colder remains. His was a war launched for personal survival. Illegality was forgiven because it paid, and violence narrated so relentlessly that it felt inevitable. The most disturbing lesson is not that this worked, but that it worked so well it became a model for future wars. Long before algorithms, Julius Caesar learned the same truth. Control the story, and you are well on the way to winning the war. How many mass murderers have a month on the calendar named after them? Next July, remember the month is named after Gaius Julius Caesar, psychopath and genocidal monster.